When I found the letter, I didn't open it right away. It was old, the paper yellowed, the ink faded, and my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in over 40 years. I stood in the attic, surrounded by dust and boxes from another life. My husband, Thomas, was downstairs fixing the kitchen light, humming the same tune he always did when he was working. He had no idea what I had just found. My heart beat faster than it had in years. I held that envelope as if it were alive. Because it was from Michael, the man I once thought I'd marry before everything changed. I sat on an old trunk, my hands trembling. For a moment, I felt like I was 20 again, standing at the train station, waving goodbye to him, promising we'd ride to each other. But life has a strange way of rewriting your plans. I never saw him again. Now, decades later, his voice had returned in this fragile piece of paper. And as I looked down at my wrinkled hands, at the life I'd built with Thomas, I wondered, what if I'd made a different choice? What if I'd said yes to Michael, instead of walking away? Little did I know, opening that letter would change how I saw my past, and my marriage, forever. Hello, everyone. My name is Grandma Evelyn. Thank you for joining me today and for listening to my story. If you're new here, welcome to our little corner of calm and truth. Please don't forget to subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your stories, too. Maybe one day, I'll share yours. Now, take a deep breath, make yourself a cup of tea, and sit with me. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's not just about love, it's about choices, forgiveness, and what time teaches the heart. Thomas and I have been married for 52 years. He's a quiet man, steady, kind, and predictable in the best way. We met after the war, at a church picnic, when I was still wearing my nurse's uniform. He wasn't the kind to speak much, but when he looked at me, there was warmth, a calm I hadn't felt in years. At that time, I needed peace more than anything. You see, before Thomas, there was Michael. Michael was my first love, the wild kind. The kind that makes you believe you could live on sunlight and dreams. He was a writer. He carried a notebook everywhere, scribbling thoughts, poems, and little sketches. He used to tell me, Evelyn, you make the world brighter just by being in it. I used to laugh and tell him he was being dramatic. But truthfully, I believed him. We were young, full of hope, and certain that love could fix anything. But then came the war. And life, in its usual cruel way, took us in different directions. Michael enlisted. I stayed behind, working at a hospital. We wrote letters for a while, but they stopped suddenly. I never knew if one got lost, or if he just stopped writing. After months of silence, I assumed he was gone. So, when Thomas came into my life, quiet, gentle, always showing up, I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance. We married a year later. And for the most part, we were happy. We built a home, raised 2 children, shared simple routines, Sunday church, morning walks, quiet dinners. But there were moments, small, passing ones, when I'd find myself wondering about Michael. Not in a longing way, but in that soft ache you get when you remember something unfinished. Still, I buried it. Life kept moving. Children grew up. Thomas retired. The house became quieter, and memories turned into the wallpaper of our days. Until that afternoon in the attic. I was sorting through old things, trying to clear space for Grace, our granddaughter, who wanted to use the attic for her art. There, inside a faded box of letters tied with ribbon, I found it, the letter with my name, written in Michael's handwriting. It must have been buried all these years. Maybe it got misplaced before I ever read it. Maybe someone put it away, thinking it was just another letter. I sat down, my hands shaking, the dust floating in the sunlight like tiny ghosts. I thought, should I tell Thomas? Then another thought whispered, no, not yet. Because before I told anyone, I needed to know what it said. That night, after dinner, I couldn't sleep. Thomas was snoring softly beside me, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. I got up, went to the living room, and sat under the warm lamplight with the letter in my hand. I hesitated before opening it. Part of me was afraid. What if it said something I didn't want to remember? But curiosity won. The seal broke easily, and the faint scent of old paper filled the air. I began to read. My dearest Evelyn, if this letter ever reaches you, it means I failed to see you one last time. I tried, I really did. They told me you were leaving town, and I came looking for you. But maybe it wasn't meant to be. I wanted to tell you that I never stopped loving you. Not once. If you found someone else, I understand. I just needed you to know you were the best part of my life. I froze. Tears blurred the words. He had come back. He had looked for me. And I never knew. For a long moment, I just sat there, reading and rereading those lines, trying to imagine the young man who wrote them, standing somewhere, heartbroken, thinking I had moved on. When I looked up, I saw a wedding photo on the mantel, me in white lace, Thomas smiling proudly beside me. My heart ached with confusion. How could two truths exist at once, love for my husband, and a ghost of love that never really died? The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made breakfast, fed the cat, read the newspaper aloud like always. Thomas noticed something, though. He looked at me over his cup of coffee and said, "You're quiet today." I smiled faintly. "Just tired." He nodded, not pressing further. That's the kind of man he is, never pushing, always giving space. But later, as I was folding laundry, I caught myself humming an old tune. One Michael used to play on his guitar. And Thomas heard it. He looked up from his chair and said softly, "I haven't heard that one in years." I froze, my hands trembling over the towels. "Oh, just something I remembered," I said quickly. He smiled, a little sad. "You used to hum that when we first married. Back when you couldn't sleep at night." I nodded and looked away. That night, the letter kept haunting me. I couldn't decide if I should hide it, or tell Thomas about it. 2 days later, while cleaning, I noticed Thomas sitting at the dining table, the letter spread open before him. My heart sunk. He looked up slowly, his eyes calm but heavy. "I found this," he said quietly. "It fell out of the attic box." There was a long silence. I didn't move. Finally, he asked, "Who is Michael?" I sat down across from him, my heart pounding. "He was someone I knew. Before you." He nodded slowly. "Someone you loved." I swallowed hard. "Yes." Thomas leaned back in his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just looked at me, the way only someone who's known you for half a century can look, with a mix of sadness and understanding. "Do you still think about him?" he asked. I hesitated. "Sometimes. Not because I wish for him, but because he was part of who I was." He nodded again, quietly. We sat there in silence, the sound of the clock filling the room. Finally, he said, "I've always known there was a part of you I could never reach. Maybe that's okay. We all have ghosts." Tears filled my eyes. "Thomas, I'm sorry." He reached across the table and took my hand. His skin was warm, his grip gentle. "I'm not angry," he said softly. "Just sad that you carried it alone all these years." I covered my mouth and cried silently. He squeezed my hand once more and whispered, "I've loved you through every part of your story, Evelyn, even the parts one didn't know." That night, we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. He didn't bring up the letter again, and I didn't either. But something had changed, something tender, something unspoken. The letter didn't destroy us. In a strange way, it revealed how deep our love had become, strong enough to hold the truth. The next morning, the house was quiet. Thomas had gone out early to tend the garden, like he always did after a night of heavy thoughts. I stood at the kitchen window, watching him. He moved slowly among the rows of flowers, his back slightly bent, his hands steady. It struck me then, this man had spent 50 years planting things that grew around our love. And here I was, holding a letter from a ghost. I made him tea, the way he liked it, 2 sugars, a drop of milk, and carried it out to him. When he looked up, his eyes softened. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said. We didn't talk about the letter that day, or the next. But it lingered in the air, like the faint smell of rain long after the clouds have gone. A week later, our granddaughter Grace came over. She's an artist, full of color and noise and sunshine. She ran up the stairs to the attic, calling, "Grandma, can I look through the old boxes again?" I smiled. "Of course, darling. Just be careful with the old papers." I watched her climb up, her laughter echoing through the house. For a moment, I wished I could be like her again, curious, fearless, untouched by time. Later, when I went up to check on her, she was sitting on the floor surrounded by photographs. She looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, who's this man?" She held up a picture, Michael. I hadn't even known that picture was still there. He was young, smiling, wearing his army uniform. And next to him, a younger me, laughing, eyes full of dreams. My heart skipped. I knelt beside her. "That's an old friend," I said softly. She studied the photo. "He looks kind." "He was," I whispered. She smiled and put it in a small pile of memories she said she wanted to paint later. I didn't stop her. Somehow, it felt right to let that image breathe again, even for a little while. That night, as I washed the dishes, Thomas came to stand beside me. He dried the plates quietly, then said, "Grace found a picture of him today, didn't she?" I nodded. "Yes. I didn't know it was still there." He smiled faintly. "You know, I once found that picture years ago when I was fixing the cabinet." I looked at him, surprised. "Why didn't you say anything?" He shrugged gently. "Because you looked happy in it. And I thought, that man must have been someone who made you smile. Why would I take that away from you?" I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thomas, you've always been kinder than I deserved." He turned to me and said, "No, Evelyn. You chose me, remember? That means everything." For the first time since finding the letter, I felt something ease inside me. It was as if forgiveness, for myself, for the past, had begun to bloom quietly between us. That night, after Thomas went to bed, I opened the letter one more time. But this time, I noticed something I hadn't before, a folded page at the bottom. It wasn't just one letter. There was another piece of paper tucked behind it. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Evelyn, if by some miracle you read this, please don't feel guilty. You were right to move on. I saw you once, in town, with a man who looked at you the way I used to. I knew then that you would be alright. Please don't ever feel you owe me anything. Loving you was enough. Michael." I pressed the paper to my chest. Tears came again, but this time, they didn't hurt the same way. Because somehow, it felt like he had let me go all those years ago, I just hadn't known it. Maybe I had been holding on to guilt that was never mine to carry. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Thomas tended the garden. I baked, read, and wrote letters to the children. But something inside both of us had shifted, gently, almost beautifully. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas said, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a trip, just the two of us. Somewhere warm. Maybe the coast." I smiled. "You, on a beach? You hate sand." He chuckled. "I don't hate it. I just prefer the shade." I laughed softly. It felt good to laugh again, easy, unforced. He looked at me and said, "We've spent a lifetime together, Evelyn. And still, there's more to know." That line stayed with me. After all these years, he still wanted to know me. To share life with me, even the parts one thought were lost to time. A few days later, I decided to visit the old town where I'd grown up, where I'd first met Michael. Thomas insisted on coming with me. We drove through roads lined with maple trees, their leaves golden in the afternoon sun. When we arrived, the air felt different, still, but heavy with memory. The old post office was still there. The church, the park bench where Michael and I once sat, all faded, but still standing. Thomas walked beside me quietly. He didn't ask questions. He just held my hand. We stopped by the riverbank, and I took out the letter. I told him, "I think I'd like to leave it here. It feels right." He nodded, understanding without words. I placed the letter in a small tin box and buried it under the willow tree by the water, the place where Michael and I once made promises we couldn't keep. When I stood up, the wind brushed through the branches, and for a brief moment, I felt a warmth on my cheek, as if someone had whispered goodbye. I turned to Thomas and smiled through my tears. "It's done," I said. He wrapped his arm around me. "Then let's go home." Back at the house that night, I looked at Thomas as he sat reading his newspaper. He looked peaceful, content, like a man who had made peace with both the past and the present. I walked over and kissed the top of his head. He looked up, surprised. "What was that for?" he asked. "For staying," I said softly. He smiled. "Always." From that day, I began writing again, not letters, but memories. Not for anyone else to read, but so I could finally let the words breathe. I wrote about my youth, about love, about the choices that shape us and the ones we must forgive ourselves for. Sometimes, Grace would come and sit with me. She'd ask, "Grandma, do you think people only fall in love once?" I'd smile and say, "No, sweetheart. Some people fall in love many times, with different faces, different moments, and sometimes, with the same person again." She'd nod, trying to understand. And I'd think, maybe that's the lesson I had to learn the hard way. Now, as I sit here, years later, the house is quiet again. Thomas passed away last winter, peacefully, in his sleep, holding my hand. When I look around, I see pieces of our life everywhere. The chair he built, the photographs, the garden he planted. Everything he touched grew with love. Sometimes, on quiet mornings, I still think about Michael. Not with longing, just with gratitude. He taught me what young love feels like. Thomas taught me what lasting love means. Both were real. Both were important. If life is a book, then some chapters are short, some long, but every one shapes the story. A few weeks after the funeral, Grace found my old diary and asked if she could read it. At first, I said no. But then I thought, maybe it's time for someone else to know. When she finished reading, she hugged me and said, "Grandma, you were brave." I smiled. "Not brave, dear. Just human." Because the truth is, being human means carrying love and loss together, sometimes in the same heartbeat. So, if you're listening to my story tonight, maybe you found something from your past that stirred your heart. Remember this. It's okay to remember. It's okay to feel. But don't let yesterday steal today's peace. Love doesn't always end where it began, but it always leaves something gentle behind. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that forgiveness, for others and for yourself, is the quietest, most powerful kind of love. Please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, where are you from? I'd love to know where my words have traveled today. Until next time. This was Grandma Evelyn. And this was my story. The letter I found from a past lover.